be quiet now because my parents are going to sleep. So, sorry if the mic is kind of weird. Sorry if it's kind of like ASMR. But, I'm going to be doing audio reading again because I don't really have time to do the full notes for Piliavin. But, congrats if you're here because Piliavin is the last study. So that's cool. Study in ACE level. So let's do it. So we need to understand what bystander apathy is. Bystanders are people who are physically present at the scene of an event or incident but do not take part or take an active part in helping others in need. Interest in the psychology of bystander behavior was triggered by blah blah blah. Yeah, so bystander apathy is used to describe the lack of help offered in such situations where, there's bystanders and there's a person who's in need of help. So, and then there's also diffusion of responsibility. When an incident is observed by more than one person, there may be a diffusion of responsibility. The more people that are present. Sorry, I had to burp. The more people that are present, the less personal responsibility each person feels. This suggests that in situations with many people present, the victim will be less likely to receive assistance, as less responsibility means less guilt for people who choose not to help. So, let's just look over it quickly. We have aims. We have 4 different aims. 4 different parts of the same aim. Research methodology, our design and variables, observer 1, observer 2, 3 different bullet points. We have our variables and our sample. Procedure, let's move this over a little bit. In our procedure, we have a victim. We have 4 different conditions. In our results, we have a type of victim, race of victim, modeled help, and group size. Then we have another thing and stuff like that. Then we have our conclusion. To go back up to the brief, Piliavin et al. I know that it's pronounced Piliavin et al. Because I looked it up. Piliavin et al. Were mainly interested in how the type and race of victims affected bystander behavior in terms of the frequency of helping responses, the speed of response, and the race of the helper. They decided to stage an incident in which an ill or drunk victim, a confederate of the experimenter, would collapse on a subway train. Confederate just means like accomplice or, like a helper, basically, somebody that's associated with the experiment, would collapse on a subway train. They believed that the ill victim would receive a more sympathetic response due to a lack of personal responsibility for their misfortune. They also believed that the risk of helping the drunk victim may be greater in terms of aggression or disgust. In addition, Piliavin et al. Were interested in whether modeled help from a second confederate would inspire more help from other passengers. Finally, they wanted to determine whether group size affected the frequency and speed of help offered. So, to start, Piliavin et al. Aimed to investigate factors. Oh yeah, sorry, I'm keeping this OBS recording here just to see if my mic starts glitching out, because it was glitching out before and not really working when I was talking quietly, so it should work fine though. So Piliavin et al. Aimed to investigate factors affecting helping behavior on a New York subway train. Specifically, they wanted to see how the following factors affected help offered to the passenger who collapsed in the carriage. The following factors were the type of victim, drunk or ill, the race of the victim, black or white, whether or not there was modeled help provided by another passenger, or if the number, and also the last factor, the number of people in the carriage, so the group size. The research methodology. The method used is a field experiment as it took place on a 7.5-minute express train between 2 New York stations, and the researchers manipulated the independent variables. Design and variables. The study was an independent measures design, as each scene was carried out in front of a different carriage full of passengers. Data was also collected via covert observation. If you don't remember what independent measures means, it means that there's completely different participants for each different independent variable being tested, or each different type of independent variable being tested. So data was also collected via covert observation. There was one observer. Observer 1 recorded the number of people in the car and the race, sex, and location of every passenger in the critical area. She also noted how many people assisted the victim as well as their race, sex, and location. Observer 2 recorded the race, sex, and location of passengers in the adjacent area as well as the time taken to assist after the collapse. Both observers noted comments made by passengers and also tried to elicit them. Variables. The independent variables were the condition of the victim, drunk or ill, the race of the victim, black or white, how close the helpful model was to the victim, critical or adjacent area, how quickly help was offered, and finally group size, how many passengers were in the carriage. The dependent variables included the time taken to help to arrive, before and after modeled help, sex and the race of the first helper, movement of passengers out of the critical area of the carriage, for example, where the collapse happened, the passengers' spontaneous comments about the collapse. So those were all the things that were recorded. Let's go over it one more time. So for the independent variables, there's a lot here, so let's go over it. The independent variables was the condition of the victim, either drunk or ill, the race of the victim, black or white, how close the helpful model was to the victim, critical or adjacent area. You're going to hear that a lot more later on, critical versus adjacent area. So how close was the helpful model to the victim, critical or adjacent area? How quickly help was offered? And finally, group size, how many passengers were in the carriage? The dependent variables included the time taken for the help to arrive. Sorry, I was yawning. So how quickly help was offered, and finally group size, how many passengers in the carriage. The dependent variables included the time taken for help to arrive before and after modeled help, sex and race of the first helper, movement of passengers out of the critical area of the carriage, which is where the collapse happened, and passengers' spontaneous comments about the collapse. The sample comprised approximately 4,450 men and women, 45% of whom were black and 55% white, all of whom were riding the 8th Avenue train in New York City on weekdays between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. Between the 15th of April and the 26th of June 1968, the mean number of people per car was 43. The mean number of people in the critical area where the incident took place was 8.5. Participants were an opportunity sample who did not give informed consent and were unaware they were taking part in a study. There you go. So this is a massive, massive sample of people, right? It's crazy. 4,450. So, procedure. A team of 4 students boarded a carriage on the New York subway train via separate doors. 2 female observers took separate seats, while the 2 male students playing the roles of victim and model remained standing. The victim always stood centrally in the critical area. 70 seconds into the journey, the victim collapsed on the floor and lay on their back, looking at the ceiling until they received help. If no help was given by the time the train reached the next station, the model helped the victim to his feet. The team would then reboard a train along the same route in the opposite direction, completing around 6 to 8 trials per day. For the victim, there were 4 teams of students, each with a victim aged between 26 and 35, who were dressed identically in the same old trousers, jacket, and no tie. 1 victim was black and 3 were white. There were 38 trials of the drunk condition and 65 trials of the ill condition. The ill victim carried a black cane, and the drunk victim carried a liquor bottle wrapped in a brown bag, smelt of alcohol. Each student acting as the victim played both roles during the course of the study. All of the models were white males aged between 24 and 29. So if you don't understand yet, the models are the people who would go in and help if nobody helped after one station. So all of the models were white males aged between 24 and 29. There were 4 conditions in which the model helped the victim to a sitting position and stayed with them until the train stopped. There was also a no model condition. The order of conditions was randomized. The model conditions were critical area early, stood in the critical area and gave help after 70 seconds. Critical area late, stood in the critical area and gave help after 150 seconds. Area adjacent early, stood adjacent to the critical area and gave help after 70 seconds. And adjacent area late, stood adjacent to the critical area and gave help after 150 seconds. Then we move on to the results. So, for the type of victim, a person appearing ill is more likely to receive help than one appearing drunk. 62 out of 65 trials versus only 19 out of 38 trials. The ill victim was helped 100% of the time when there was no model. There was no tendency for same race helping unless the victim was drunk. The drunk white victim was helped 100% of the time, while the drunk black victim was only helped 73% of the time, and more frequently by black helpers than white. 9% of trials with a black victim, people left the critical area versus 5% of trials with a white victim. Early models were more likely to for modeled help. Early models were more likely to elicit additional help than late models, 4 versus 2. There was a weak, for group size, there was a weak positive correlation between group size and helping behavior. Groups of 7 or more were faster to respond than groups of 3. So that's going opposite to the hypothesis of diffuse responsibility, right? That we talked about up here. What's it called? Diffusion of responsibility, yeah. Okay, so out of the trials, for the no model condition for the white victims, the cane, aka the ill person with the cane, the ill condition with the cane was helped 100% of the time. Same for drunk. Black victim, the cane was helped 100% of the time. The drunk only 73%. So on and so forth. We don't have to know the exact numbers for these, thankfully. Let's just read the summary. Additionally, males were more likely to help the man than females. 90% of first helpers were male, and 68% of helpers were white. In 20% of trials, people left the critical area, and a total of 34 people left. I was spacing out. Let me read that one more time. Additionally, males were more likely to help the man than females. 90% of first helpers were male, and 68% of helpers were white. In 20% of trials, people left the critical area, and a total of 34 people left. The researchers reported few interesting findings from bystander comments. Female comments included, "It's for men to help him. I wish I could help him. I'm not strong enough. I never saw this kind of thing before. I don't know where to look. You feel so bad that you don't know what to do." Interesting comments. Very nice. Conclusions. The research did not support Darley's and Laton's diffusion of responsibility hypothesis in a real-world setting. Despite the collapses taking place on busy trains, help was offered frequently and quickly. Piliavin et al. Proposed that witnessing an emergency situation leads to the creation of an emotional arousal state, which a person then wishes to rid themselves of. The strength and nature of this arousal depends on factors such as the level of empathy a person feels for the victim, their distance from the situation, and the amount of time that passes without intervention. To reduce this arousal, a person can offer help directly, fetch help, leave the scene, or decide that the victim is undeserving of help. Piliavin et al. Suggests that people weigh up these options using a cost-reward matrix. Costs may be related to either helping, such as effort and disgust, or not helping, feelings of self-blame, or the negative perceptions of others, as well as perceived rewards. Cool. Let's move down here to the evaluation ethical issues. Informed consent. One key criticism of this research is the lack of informed consent. Participants were unaware that the study was taking place, so this was unable to be obtained. Therefore, the participants could not give their permission to take part in the potentially distressing situation of a person collapsing in their subway carriage, which might have caused them psychological harm. Furthermore, this also meant that they were not given the opportunity to consent to their data being used in the study. Some people's comments were recorded in the published journal article, which might have caused embarrassment. So, let's just read the beginning one more time. Lack of consent. Participants were unaware that the study was taking place, so they couldn't obtain consent, and blah blah blah. Yeah. Another weakness is that due to the nature of the subway and the large number of participants leaving the train at the stop, no debrief could take place. This meant that the participants could not have the aims of the experiment explained to them, or have any questions answered to ensure they left the train in the same psychological state in which they had arrived. Unfortunately, the lack of debrief meant that some participants may have left the train feeling shocked at the collapse of an ill or drunk man, or potential guilt and not having offered help. Now we move on to methodological issues. Reliability. So for standardization, a strength is that the researchers controlled several aspects of the procedure. The victims always wore the same clothing, and the collapse always took place when the train passed the first station on the subway route. This ensured that the procedure could be repeated to test whether helping behavior towards the ill and drunk victims was reliable from trial to trial. So it's a standardized procedure. That's always reliability. Nice. You can say that they wore the same clothes. The collapse took place on the same time at the first station. Yeah. Ensured that the procedure is repeatable. Yeah. Test reliability of findings. Validity. Confounding variables. A weakness is that only one black victim was used in all the trials, with only one person acting in this condition of the study. It's difficult to conclude that helping behavior towards this individual was due to race, as opposed to personality factors or differences in his acting behavior in the cane/drunk conditions, as some of the students felt embarrassed to act drunk. This means that the findings about helping behavior for the independent variable of race may lack validity. Another weakness is lack of controls. The location and activity of the people in the carriage was not controlled. Some people may have been reading a newspaper or were distracted in another way, not seeing the victim collapse. This would have affected the validity of the study's findings, as their reason for not helping may have not been a conscious one. Then we move on to qualitative data. This is a strength. A strength was that qualitative data was also collected in the study, which allowed for further insight into bystanders' justifications for lack of helping behavior. For example, several females made comments such as, "I wish I could help him, I'm just not strong enough." This qualitative data allowed Piliavin et al. To draw more meaningful conclusions about the justifications people made when deciding not to help the victim, for example, through their cost-reward matrix. Objectivity and subjectivity, quantitative data is a strength in this study, as the collection of mainly quantitative data, which allowed the researchers to objectively compare helping behaviors between the drunk and cane conditions. For example, the time taken for a victim to receive help was recorded, which is a measure free from researcher bias and interpretation, allowing for valid comparisons to be made between the conditions. Generalizations and ecological validity. One strength of this research was the very large sample size. Estimate of 4,450 men and women witnessed the victim incidents, comprising around 45% black and 55% white individuals. It could be argued that such a large sample is representative of New Yorkers in general, and thus the findings may be applied externally to the city's population. However, a weakness is that the research also lacked population validity, as participants were likely to consist predominantly of commuters on a specific New York subway route. Urban residents may experience more de-individuation, which is loss of individuality and personal responsibility due to their busy surroundings and individualistic culture. Therefore, this limits the extent to which the findings on helping behavior can be applied to people living in rural areas, smaller cities, or collectivist cultures. Generalizing to everyday life, a strength of this research was that it was a field experiment taking place on a real subway route. The passengers witnessed an incident take place on their everyday commute, and were unaware that they were being observed. Thus, demand characteristics were avoided, and the participants showed genuine responses to a supposed real-life situation. This gives the research a high level of ecological validity, allowing the researchers to draw conclusions about real-life bystander behavior in emergency situations. Sorry, I'm yawning again. Okay, so issues and debates, final bit. Individual versus situational explanations. There was evidence to support a situational explanation for helping behavior in this study. The situation of an ill person falling appeared to trigger helping behavior in nearby observers. On every trial without a model, someone offered to help the ill victim, thus demonstrating that the specific situation a person found themselves in was the main motivator behind their subsequent behavior. On the other hand, oh my It's really sore. On the other hand, sorry. On the other hand, the majority of first helpers, which is 90%, of any victim was male, supporting an individual explanation for helping behavior. Piliavin et al. Suggested that people use a cost-reward matrix to determine whether or not to help. Sorry, I'm burping again. Goddamn. To determine whether or not to help. The perceived cost of helping may be lower for males and different for each person depending on their personality and personal circumstances, highlighting an individual explanation for differences in helping behavior. Applications to everyday life, training and education. We're almost done. Training and education, educating students on the cognitive processes people go through in emergency situations may help them to change their response and be more likely to help. Understanding the cost-reward matrix would help people to recognize their own bias in interpreting the heightened emotions. This understanding may then help to override negative or non-altruistic feelings in order to offer help to a victim instead of ignoring them. Okay. Cool. Bye-bye. Good luck with your AS levels tomorrow. If you're taking psychology, I mean, why would you be watching this if you're not taking psychology? But yeah, good luck if you have it tomorrow. If you're watching this for the next AS levels after this, good luck as well. Bye bye. Good night.